The words left her mouth in a whisper, a prayer the desert wind tried to steal, but they landed with the force of a collapsing canyon. Would you take care of one of them? The question was offered by an 11-year-old girl with hair as white as sun-bleached bone. Her shoulders were too small to carry the weight of the world, but she was carrying it anyway. In her arms, she held two starving infant twins. Their cries were a fragile sound against the vast, indifferent silence of the Arizona territory. And before her, mounted on his horse like a statue carved from the red rock itself, sat the Apache warrior, Gahiji. His face was a mask of grief. His eyes held a pain the girl was only just beginning to understand. The entire town of Harmony Creek watched from their dusty windows, their breath caught in their throats. They were watching a ghost child offer half of her broken heart to the man they considered the specter of death itself. This moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was forged in the weeks after the fever. A merciless thief that stole the warmth from her parents' bodies and left an unnerving quiet in their small cabin. Elizabeth Thorne had always been different. Her pale skin and snow-white hair made her an object of superstitious whispers. After her parents were gone, the town's pity was a hollow thing. They were all just clinging to survival. They saw Elizabeth and the twins as three more mouths they couldn't afford to feed. Their fear was bigger than their charity. Fear of the drought, fear of the winter, and fear of the silent figures who watched from the mesas. Chief among them was Gahiji. He never raided, he never threatened. He just appeared at the edge of town as the sun went down, a solitary sentinel whose presence terrified them. They told stories of his savagery, but the truth was a story of parallel sorrow. He too had buried his family, a wife and son taken by the same kind of sickness that had orphaned Elizabeth. His vigil was not one of aggression, it was mourning. Inside her cabin, Elizabeth was fighting a losing war. The firewood dwindled. The last sack of beans grew lighter. The twins' cries grew weaker. She was a child playing the role of a mother, and the performance was draining the life from her. Love was not enough. Survival required a sacrifice she could barely comprehend. And so, with a resolve born of pure desperation, she had wrapped the infants in the last clean cloths, walked out of the cabin that was no longer a home, but a tomb, and headed straight for the phantom everyone feared. She didn't know about the old Chiricahua prophecies, the ones that spoke of a white-haired spirit child who would appear in a time of great sorrow, a harbinger of a change that could either heal or break the world. She only knew he was her last hope. Her desperate plea now hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge between two worlds of profound loss. The silence that answered her was a living thing. For a long moment, Gahiji did not move. His eyes, dark and deep as a desert well, held hers. He wasn't looking at a child. He was looking at a soul laid bare. The town of Harmony Creek held its breath, expecting the worst. They saw a predator sizing up its prey. They were blind to the truth. They couldn't see the ghost that stood between the warrior and the girl, the phantom of Gahiji's own son, the memory of his wife's gentle hands. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, Gahiji swung his leg over his horse and slid to the ground. The soft thud of his moccasins on the earth broke the spell. He did not walk like a conqueror. He walked like a man carrying a mountain of sorrow on his shoulders. He stopped before her, his tall frame casting a long shadow over her. She should have been terrified. But standing this close, she saw the fine lines of grief etched around his eyes. He was not a monster. He was a man hollowed out by loss, just like her. He slowly raised a hand, palm open. He gestured toward one of the bundles. Her arms ached. To surrender one was an act of faith so profound it bordered on madness. It was to tear her own heart in two and give half to a stranger. With a ragged breath that felt like a piece of her soul leaving her body, she shifted the baby's weight and gently, hesitantly, placed her brother into Gahiji's waiting arms. The transaction was completed in utter silence. The warrior's large, calloused hands cradled the infant with a breathtaking tenderness. For a fleeting second, as Gahiji looked down at the child, the granite mask of his face crumbled. A wave of indescribable pain washed over his features. In that tiny bundle, he saw not the child of an enemy, but the ghost of his own son. This, the town thought, was the end of it. A strange bargain had been struck. One child had been taken, but Gahaji's gaze lifted from the infant. It swept over Elizabeth, and for the first time, he seemed to truly see her. The sunken hollows beneath her eyes, the fine tremor of exhaustion in her limbs, the fierce, protective fire that still burned. He looked at the second twin, still clutched in her arms, now beginning to whimper. He understood. To save one was an incomplete act. It would only prolong the suffering of the other two. This was not a negotiation for one life. It was a rescue for three. In a movement that sent a shock wave of disbelief through the watching town, he shifted the baby he held into the crook of one arm. Then he extended his free hand. It was not a demand. It was an invitation, a lifeline. Elizabeth stared at that outstretched hand. Without a second's hesitation, she placed her small, trembling hand into his. His grip was firm, warm, and impossibly gentle, and he led her, in the second twin, toward his horse. The journey was a dreamlike passage through a landscape of shifting shadows. Tucked securely on the horse, with one twin in her arms and the other cradled by Gahiji, she was enveloped in a strange, profound quiet. She was a ghost leaving a town of ghosts, heading toward a future she couldn't imagine. After what felt like an eternity, the flickering orange of man-made fires appeared on the horizon. They drew closer to a scattered encampment of wickiups, domed huts that seemed to grow from the earth itself. This was the Apache rancheria. The moment they entered the camp, 100 pairs of eyes fell upon her, sharp, assessing, and full of a deep, burning suspicion. Gahiji slid from the horse and reached up for her. As her feet touched the ground, she felt the weight of their collective stare. He stood beside her, a silent protector, but even he could not dispel the wall of distrust that rose before them. From the largest wickiup, a woman emerged. She was old, her face a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles. This was Tala, the matriarch, the keeper of the old ways. She walked toward them, her gaze sweeping past Gahiji to fix solely on Elizabeth. It was a look of such intensity that Elizabeth felt the woman could see every secret she held. Tala circled her slowly, her eyes lingering on Elizabeth's white hair. She was seeing the walking embodiment of a prophecy, one that spoke of a white-haired spirit who would come in a time of great change. But prophecies did not distinguish between fortune and ruin. Tala's gaze then fell to the twins, her expression hardening. Two more mouths to feed in a season of scarcity. Sanctuary would not be given freely. A place by their fire had to be earned. The message was clear, conveyed without a single word. You have brought your sorrow to our doorstep. Our own sorrow is great enough. Prove that you are not another vessel of death. Show us you can draw life from this hard land, not just drain it away. The days that followed were a trial by silence. Elizabeth and the twins were given a small wickiup at the edge of the camp, a place of shelter but not of welcome. The Apache people were not cruel. They simply made her invisible. Her world shrank, defined by the constant, demanding needs of the two infants. The challenge laid down by Tala hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. How could she prove she was a source of life when she herself was withering from loneliness? The first test came not from the tribe, but from within her own fragile family. The smaller twin, a boy she had named Samuel, developed a cough. Soon a fever set his tiny body trembling. An older woman from the camp brought a poultice, but the fever didn't break. The unspoken sentiment in the camp was a sad, fatalistic one. The weakest are always the first to be reclaimed by the earth. But Elizabeth refused to accept it. A memory surfaced, her mother in their garden, tending a small plant with fuzzy silver leaves. Feverfew, her mother had called it. A gentle medicine for calming fevers. A settler's remedy. A desperate, impossible hope took root. She had seen a plant like it in the canyons. Leaving the sick twin in the care of the woman who had first offered help, a silent, trusting exchange that was a victory in itself, Elizabeth slipped out of camp. For hours she searched under the relentless sun. Just as her hope began to fray, she found it, a small, resilient patch growing in the cool shadow of a boulder. She gathered the leaves and worked tirelessly, crushing them into a paste as her mother had taught her. The women of the tribe watched, their curiosity piqued. This was not their medicine. This was something else. With infinite patience, Elizabeth dabbed tiny amounts of the liquid onto the baby's lips, coaxing him to swallow. She did this for hours, her focus absolute. Slowly, miraculously, a change began. The violent trembling subsided. His breathing eased. By morning, the fever had broken. He slept a deep, peaceful sleep. The silence in the camp that morning was different. It was not one of ignoring, but of observation. Later, a woman silently placed a piece of freshly cooked rabbit beside her wickiup. Another showed her a more efficient way to grind roots. They were small offerings, tiny threads of connection. Tala watched from a distance, a flicker of what might have been respect in her ancient eyes. Elizabeth had used a piece of her old world, a forgotten piece of wisdom, and it had proven to be a source of life. But just as this fragile piece began to settle, it was shattered. A young warrior named Kale, his face a mask of bitter resentment, strode into the firelight. He pointed an accusing finger at Elizabeth. "Gahiji brought a curse among us," he snarled. "A bad harvest follows her steps. Our best scout has not returned from the mountains. This healing is a trick, a white man's poison to make us lower our guard." His words were a spear aimed at the tribe's deepest fears. And in an instant, Elizabeth was once again an omen. Her small victory was rendered meaningless. Her very existence was on trial. Kale's accusation poisoned the air. The disappearance of the scout, Nikai, was no longer just a tragedy. It was an omen, and Kale had given it a face. Hers. Search parties returned at dusk, their shoulders slumped in defeat. They spoke of Nikai's trail vanishing near a treacherous canyon, a place the spirits shunned. The tribe's mood grew darker. Kale's whispers suggested the earth itself was angry at her presence. Elizabeth felt the weight of their collective gaze, a constant pressure. She was a curse, a bringer of sorrow. She listened as the warriors spoke of a wall of sleeping stone. The phrase jolted her. It was a term her prospector father had used for an unstable shale formation, prone to collapsing. A certainty surged through her. They were seeing a tombstone, but she knew how to find the door. Summoning a courage she didn't know she possessed, she knelt before Tala and Gahiji. With a piece of charcoal, she drew on a hide. She sketched the canyon, the area of the sleeping stone, and then she drew a large X, not where they had been searching, but on the other side of the rockfall, in a small hidden alcove. Her eyes pleaded with them to understand. It was Gahiji who saw the truth in her desperate map. He saw a different kind of logic, foreign but compelling. Tala, with a slow, deliberate nod, gave her consent. They would risk one more search. Gahiji would lead, and Tala decreed that Kali must accompany them, not as a believer, but as a witness. The journey was a torment of tension. Kale's animosity was a palpable wave, but Elizabeth focused only on her father's lessons, scanning the rock formations. She led them away from the established path, toward the wall of stone the others had deemed impassable. And there it was, a vast, chaotic scar on the mountainside, a fresh landslide. As they stood in stunned silence, a faint sound reached them, a weak cry for help. Nikai was alive, pinned beneath a massive slab of rock, his leg crushed, but alive. As Gahiji and the others worked to free their friend, Elizabeth's eyes scanned the debris. Something felt wrong. Then she saw it. Glinting in the light was a small cast-iron pickaxe head, a settler's tool. Her blood ran cold. This was no act of angry spirits. The rock slide had been caused by men, her people. The curse was real, but it wasn't her. It was the relentless, encroaching shadow of her own kind. The return to camp was triumphant. The news of Nakai's survival and the ghost child's role in it spread like wildfire. The looks she received were no longer of suspicion, but of awe. But as the celebration began, Kale approached her, his face unreadable. He had seen the pickaxe too. "You saved him," he said, his voice low and stripped of its earlier venom. "The stone speaks to you. You see the secrets of your people. Now you will help us fight them." It was not an alliance. It was a conscription. Her heroic act had not freed her. It had bound her to them and to their war forever. The title of curse was stripped from Elizabeth, replaced by a new one, whispered with a mixture of awe and caution. "She who sees the stone." The wall of invisibility around her crumbled. Women no longer fell silent when she approached. Instead, they might offer a small smile or show her how to stitch a moccasin. Tala, the matriarch, now looked at her with an intensity that was instructing, not just assessing. She began to teach Elizabeth the secrets of the desert plants, creating a silent dialogue between their two worlds of knowledge. Her relationship with Gahiji deepened in the quiet spaces of the day. He remained a man of few words, but his silence was now a comfortable, protective blanket. He began to teach her the Chiricahua words for the world around them. When he watched her with the twins, his gaze held a profound and gentle sorrow, now mingled with a burgeoning sense of peace. In the alchemy of their shared grief, a new and unlikely family was being forged. The revelation that would cement her place came on an ordinary afternoon. Elizabeth sat with the twins who were playing with a small, smooth river stone tied to a leather cord around her neck, her last link to her mother. As Tala passed, her eyes fell upon the stone. She stopped dead, her breath catching. With a reverence that startled Elizabeth, the old woman knelt, reaching a trembling hand toward it. Through Gahiji, the story tumbled out. Years ago, Tala's younger sister had been bitten by a rattlesnake. A white woman had found her and saved her life. As a gift, the sister had given her this very stone, marked with the symbol of their clan. That white woman was Elizabeth's mother. The truth settled with breathtaking force. Elizabeth was not a random stray. She was the daughter of a woman who had shown them kindness. Her arrival was not an accident. It was the closing of a circle, a debt of life being honored across the years. That night, Elizabeth finally felt the unambiguous feeling of home. But the calm was shattered. A commotion erupted. Nikai, the scout she had saved, burst into the firelight, his face a mask of cold fury. In his hand, he held a piece of wood, freshly cut and sharpened. A surveyor's stake. He drove it into the earth at Tala's feet and spoke one guttural word that needed no translation, a word that ripped through the newfound peace like a cannon shot. Spring. The prospectors had returned. They had laid claim to the tribe's very heart, its sacred water. The quiet war had just begun. The surveyor's stake was a declaration that their world was about to end. A war council was held. For the first time, Elizabeth was brought into the circle. She seized the stone, Cale insisted, his voice sharp. She sees their minds. She will be our eyes. And so the ghost child became their chief strategist. With charcoal on hide, she mapped out the enemy's logic, the likely placement of their camp, the devastating range of their rifles. She was defending her new home by wielding the terrible knowledge of her own heritage. Following her map, a scouting party led by Gahiji and Kale moved like shadows. What they saw filled them with a sacred rage. At their lifeblood, the spring, a raw wound had been carved into the earth. 3 prospectors had built a crude dam, churning the sacred water into a muddy slurry. A plan devised by Elizabeth was put into motion. Under a moonless night, the warriors moved with supernatural stealth. It was not a battle, but sabotage. Tools were broken, a tent slashed, and most importantly, they diverted their own dam, allowing a torrent of clean water to flow back toward the camp. In the confusion, Cale snatched a leather saddlebag. Inside was another map, this one detailed with notes scribbled in a familiar hand. Elizabeth stared at it, her blood turning to ice. She recognized the spidery scrawl of Mr. Abernathy, the merchant from Harmony Creek. The threat was not anonymous. It was the calculated greed of a man from her old life, a man who would see her new family perish. The enemy now had a face. The prospector's retaliation was swift and brutal. A rifle shot splintered the totem at the camp's entrance. Then came the ultimatum, shouted across the chasm. The rumors from Harmony Creek had reached them, rumors of a white-haired girl who could read the secrets of the stone. Their demand was simple and monstrous. They wanted the girl. If she was delivered, they would consider sharing the water. If not, they would poison the spring with mercury and burn the camp to the ground. The council was thrown into turmoil. To hand her over was unthinkable, but to refuse meant certain death. While the warriors argued, Elizabeth felt a cold calm descend. She had been a burden, then an asset. Now she saw her final role, a shield. Before anyone could stop her, she walked to the center of her wickiup, took a beaded leather cord, and carefully tied back her snow-white hair. It was not an act of surrender. It was an act of arming herself. Then she strode out past the arguing council and into the open space, a solitary figure walking willingly toward the heart of the fire. The three prospectors met Elizabeth in the open scrubland, their eyes glittering with avarice. They saw a small girl, a key to unlock the Earth's treasures. They underestimated her completely. She played her part with chilling perfection, her face a mask of frightened compliance. She would lead them to the shining stone, she whispered. They grinned, believing their brutal ultimatum had worked. They had no idea they were not her captors. They were her instruments. High on the ridges above, unseen, silent figures moved with the grace of mountain cats. Gahiji, Kale, and Nikai were her guardian angels, her silent witnesses. She led them deep into the labyrinthine canyons, occasionally pointing to a seam of quartz or a scattering of fool's gold. The stone breathes here, she would say, feeding their greed, making them careless. Finally, she led them into a narrow box canyon, a place her father had circled in red on his map with a single word: tomb. The walls were a fractured, unstable mess of shale, a catastrophe waiting for a reason. The mother lode, she said, her voice a whisper, pointing to a fissure-laced section of the cliff face. It sleeps deep inside the stone. A rabid, feverish light entered the men's eyes. All caution was abandoned. They raised their heavy iron pickaxes, the instruments of their own undoing. Elizabeth began to back away slowly, following an escape route she had already identified. The first blow of a pickaxe against the fragile rock face echoed like a gunshot, then another and another. The men worked in a frenzy, attacking the mountain. A fine shower of dust rained down. A low groaning sound vibrated through the soles of her feet. The groan deepened into a roar as a web of cracks raced across the cliff face. The prospectors finally looked up, their faces a mask of dawning terror. But it was too late. With a sound that tore the sky apart, the entire cliff face gave way. An avalanche of rock and earth, tons of it, poured into the canyon. Elizabeth was already scrambling up her escape path as the world behind her dissolved into a thundering cloud of dust and death. The canyon that had been a path was now a sealed grave. She emerged into the clean air, her body trembling, but her spirit unbroken. From the shadows, Gahiji appeared, his face a storm of relief and awe. Kale and Nikai were beside him, looking down at the dust-filled tomb. She had won the war not with weapons but with wisdom, turning the enemy's own greed into the agent of their destruction. But as the dust settled, Nikai pointed to a distant ridge. A fourth man, a lookout, had watched the entire cataclysm. They saw his silhouette for a moment before he spurred his horse into a frantic gallop, racing back towards Harmony Creek. The immediate danger was buried, but the story of what had happened was now free, a poisoned seed about to be planted in the heart of her old world. 3 summers passed. The violent echo of the rock slide had faded, replaced by the gentle rhythms of a life renewed. The tribe thrived, the spring running clear and pure. Elizabeth, no longer a girl but a young woman, moved through the camp with a quiet confidence. Her white hair was no longer a symbol of otherness, but a mark of honor, the sign of the spirit-touched guardian who had commanded the mountain to defend them. The twins, Samuel and Sarah, were now boisterous children of 3, their laughter a constant music. They were children of the Chiricahua, with Gahiji as their father in every way that mattered. In the alchemy of their shared grief, a new family had been forged, its foundation built on mutual rescue. But what of the escaped witness? The man had galloped back to Harmony Creek, his mind shattered. He didn't tell a story of a clever girl and a lucky rock slide. He told a tale of pure terror, of a white-haired witch who lived among the savages, a demon who spoke to the earth and commanded the mountains to fall. His story, born of fear and superstition, was far more potent than the truth. It spread like a grass fire. Mr. Abernathy's dreams of gold turned to nightmares. No prospector, no trapper would dare venture into the canyons that were now known as the Ghost Girl's domain. Elizabeth's singular act of defiance had done more than eliminate 3 dangerous men. It had created a legend, a myth so powerful it became a supernatural shield, protecting her family for generations. In the warm glow of an evening fire, Gahiji pulled the twins close. Elizabeth sat beside them, mending a small moccasin. The warrior began a story. He spoke of a time of great sorrow, when the people were losing hope. But the spirit sent a guardian, a child with hair like the winter snow, who was small in stature but held the wisdom of the mountains in her heart. He was telling his children their own story, weaving it into the sacred tapestry of their history. The family forged in desperation and loss was now whole, bound by a love that had healed all wounds. They were proof that the deepest roots of family are not grown in blood, but in the soil of shared sacrifice. Home was not the cabin she had lost, but the circle of warmth she had found. And in the vast, silent heart of the desert, they had found a peace that would last a lifetime. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from which corner of the world you are watching this story. And if you found this tale as moving as I did, don't forget to subscribe. A big hug to you all.